So that's putting up to the next question. So what is a koan then?
Well, in some different lineages, koans are, well, I can say first what they are not. They are not nonsense riddles that you have to solve. That's a common misunderstanding.
Oh, really?
They're not nonsense. They're not illogical. Maybe they're unlogical in terms of Western rational linear logic, but they're about the logic, their language about words about, they're more like poetry than didactic teachings. They are about the logic of awakening and the logic of keeping alive the tradition of awakening. So in some traditions, Rinzai, and Rinzai and Soto are the two main branches in Japan, and there are a lot of stereotypes about them which are not true, but like that Soto does meditation and Rinzai does koans, both do both. Both traditions do both. But there are particular ways of working with koans. So mostly in the West, we now think of koan practice as this, most people think of it as the tradition of working through a curriculum of koans, of different teaching stories from some of the great koan collections. That's one way that koans are practiced. That's not the way in Soto, and that's not what Dogen did. But we use these stories in Soto as teaching stories about our own practice. These are stories about, most of them, many of them are about teachers from the 800s and 700s and 900s in China. So these stories have been studied for 1,000 years because they have something to say about our own practice and life now, and continue to do that. So it's not that they're not nonsense, even though they may seem paradoxical to our logical sense of things. They're like poetry. They're language that unlanguages language. They're language that unlanguages our usual sense of subject, verb, object, where we think of the world as a bunch of dead objects out there that we have to verb, or that we have to prevent ourselves from being verbed by. So these koan teachings are, that Dogen commented on extensively in various different modes, are resources, teaching stories, like parables maybe from the Bible, or other kinds of teaching stories that are used in other spiritual traditions. One thing is that Zen famously claims to be direct pointing to mind or heart beyond words and letters. This beyond words and letters, though, doesn't mean that we don't, and it's different in different lineages, but in Soto, and particularly in the branch of Soto I'm in, we do study the words and letters of the ancient masters. And ironically, for a tradition that claims to be beyond words and letters, Zen has produced a huge volume of literature, because in each generation, in many generations, these old stories are commented on. The koan collections, the famous koan collections, and there were many of them in China. Now there are just a few that are focused on maybe, but those are the original teaching story with commentary, and then there's commentary on the commentary, and then many teachers make comments on those commentaries. So we have this huge, huge volume of literature from a tradition that claims to be beyond words and letters. There's some teachers in some lineages who take this beyond words and letters very literally. Like I practiced with a wonderful teacher in Japan, did a retreat with him in a place where the students are literally not allowed to read. That's a kind of fundamentalist idea, literal idea of this. But anyway, the koans are teaching stories that we use. Of course, we also use the teaching stories from our own everyday lives and try to face using various resources from the Bodhisattva tradition of universal awakening, the precepts and transcendent practices, and look at how they appear in our everyday activity, and work with a teacher with how to develop and unfold them. So it's not about gradual enlightenment, it's about developing our ability to actually be able to be helpful in the world and to share this reality.
So can you give me like a taste of a koan is, like an example? I know maybe we don't have enough time, but if you could.
Oh no, some of them are very short. One of the ones that I use first is from a great teacher named Jiaozhou or Joshu in Japan. Joshu in Japanese, Jiaozhou in Chinese. Different lineage from Soto, but we study him and we study many teachers. When he was he lived to be 120. Maybe that's why he's considered maybe the greatest teacher of all time, because he just had a long time to teach and practice. But he was great. But when he was a young student, or when he was early in his studies, he asked his teacher, whose name is Nanchuan or Nansen in Japanese, what is the way? What is the Tao? And Nanchuan said, ordinary mind, everyday mind is the way. And Jiaozhou said, oh, well then how do I get to that? And Nanchuan said, the more you try and get there, the further away you are. And then Jiaozhou, who was a very good student, of course, asked, well then how do I know if it's the way or not? And Nanchuan said, it's not a matter of knowing or not knowing. Knowing is just some fantasy, not knowing is just blankness. When you reach the true way, beyond doubt, it is vast and open as the sky. So that's the whole story. There's a whole lot that can be said about it. But anyway, that's the everyday mind is the way story.
That's something we can think about it every day, I guess, right?
Well, a part of the practice of koans is not, one can think about them, but also to just be present with them, to sit with them, to allow them to be part of your life. So you might memorize it or write it down or something, and just wake up when you wake up, recite it, and then forget about it, but just let it be part of our everyday experience.